Well, good evening, and how are you this evening? There's never a day goes by that you don't find something interesting in the newspaper, and I'm going to read this whole thing for you. It's in the Globe and Mail. It's not the affluenza kid. Affluenza, give me a break, will you? No, this is domestic abuse. England and Wales outlaw controlling behaviour. People who use repeated threats, humiliation, intimidation to control their intimate partners or family members could face prosecution in England and Wales under a law that became effective on Tuesday. Coercive or controlling behaviour can now be prosecuted as a crime punishable by a fine and up to 5 years in prison. It can be applied only when the behaviour has had a serious effect on the victim's life or causes them to fear violence if they don't comply. Central government guidance for police enforcement published earlier in December says it closes the gap between existing laws and quotes a 2007 report suggesting that coercive control is the most common and dangerous way in which women are abused. Controlling or coercive behaviour is primarily a form of violence against women and girls, the Government Home Office said. It advises enforcers to consider the role of gender in the context of power and control that exists in heterosexual relationships. Authorities say stopping someone from socializing, controlling their social media access, or using apps or spyware to put them under surveillance will be covered by the new legislation. It is supposed to apply only in cases where the offending behaviour is repeated or chronic. Yeah, make a note of that little part there, repeated or chronic. The guidance says making threats to publish personal information, it mentions outing somebody as a prime example, can also be viewed as criminal behaviour and can repeatedly telling someone they are worthless. Director of Public Prosecutions Alison Saunders said this type of behaviour can limit victims' basic human rights by reducing their freedom of movement and their independence. This behaviour can be incredibly harmful in an abusive relationship where one person holds more power than the other. Even if on the face of it this behaviour might seem playful, innocuous, loving, she said, victims can be frightened from the repercussions of not abiding by someone else's rules. Often they fear that violence will be used against them or suffer from extreme psychological or emotional abuse. Many victims say the trauma from psychological abuse is worse than the trauma from physical abuse, Mr. Saunders said. The new legislation was created after a majority of people consulted by the government said that existing abuse laws did not offer sufficient protection. Polly Neat, Chief Executive of Women's Aid, said in a statement that the advocacy group was thrilled with the new law. And I too am thrilled with the new law because there's nothing worse than a controller or controlling behaviour, and we all know that implied threats are just as real in their effect as actual threats. Taking away someone's social media, spying on someone, these are all reprehensible behaviours. Unfortunately, it just happens to be all the behaviours that our government engages in. I find it interesting that we have a bullying issue in schools, and the government obviously would never be able to solve this problem because the government itself is a bully. And if you don't believe me, give me one instance where if you don't comply with the government, it is under threat of some kind of abuse of some kind. You don't pay your property taxes. Say for example, okay, I'll give you a little scenario here. Say for example, property taxes are going up at a ridiculous rate. The council is misspending money. Their best business practices are not the best practices at all. They're completely wasteful. They go through committee after committee after committee and just completely waste your money whilst nothing gets done. No repairs on the streets get done, this kind of stuff. No upgrades to water facilities, water treatment facilities, bridges, all kinds of infrastructure. So you decide to protest by not paying your property taxes. What's the first thing you get told? Well, if you don't want to pay your property taxes, we'll seize your property. if you don't want to pay your hydro bill because you want to protest the way hydro is managed, we'll cut off your hydro. You don't like the way the water department is being run? Well, we'll cut off your water. It's an either-or situation. Look at our foreign policy. As soon as a country does not comply with our demands, say for example Russia, we immediately threaten them with embargoes and all kinds of sanctions. We did this in Iraq. We've done this in country after country around the world that didn't want to comply with our foreign policy ambitions. So now for the government to actually bring out legislation outlawing this kind of behaviour, well, my question is, will it be possible for the average citizen to say, take the government to court for its bullying ways, for threat of prosecution if you don't comply, when maybe you have a legitimate reason? Maybe you've been pushed to the edge of your, the end of your tether, because after repeated attempt after attempt after attempt to find out information, to get some kind of satisfaction, something like that, you just got no success at all, and this was absolutely the last resort. The courts haven't helped you out in your position, and so this is your last resort to refuse to pay property taxes. Just for example, I'm just giving you an example here, and you're immediately threatened. Well, what's that all about? How come you didn't get to present your idea, your thoughts, your so anyway, I just thought this was pretty funny. Not because it's a funny law, just because of the little irony that is involved with this law. And anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's another interesting little thing that I got from the Corbett report, James Corbett and James Evans Pilato. They do Good News Next Week, is one of the shows they do together, but they are both incredible researchers in their own right. I would highly recommend that you check out corbettreport.com. Anyways, I have in my hot little hand a document here which is quite interesting. So here is the document. I downloaded it because after I started reading it, it was just so absolutely hilarious. I've printed some of these off and given them to friends because, we all recognise. Well, you'll see as soon as I start reading some of this stuff. Anyway, it's a document called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. I don't know if you can see that. The Simple Sabotage Field Manual. And it's been unclassified. It was printed originally 17th of January 1944, and the reason it was put into print was to help servicemen and officers who had been captured by the Germans at this particular time and pressed into service or some kind of work situation, and so it was to help undermine the enemy through acts of simple sabotage. And it also showed you how to encourage, other people who may be from occupied countries, who are not necessarily in the service of the armed forces, but still were a prisoner of one kind or another. And it is very interesting because if you've ever had to deal with government, you will find that they employ all of these mechanisms. And I'm sure that you'll recognise them as soon as I start reading them off. And it really explains an awful lot. And it's also, it gives you good ammunition that when you see these sort of tricks being played on you, you know that they are tricks to put you off the track, to slow you down, to put you on the back foot. They are all incredibly effective. Okay, so this first little section is for general interference with organizations and production. A. Organizations and conferences. 1. Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. 2. Make speeches. Talk frequently as possible at great length and illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences, and never hesitate to make a few patriotic comments. Just throw that in there to, loosen it all up a little bit. 3. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committees as large as possible, never less than 5. Trust me, I've sat on many committees. Once you start getting up into the 6s, 7s, 8s, it's uncontrollable. There are just so many opinions, it's hard to come to a decision. It really bogs down the whole process. So really committees, 5 is actually a very good number for a committee. 4. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Where have I seen that before? 5. Haggle over precise wordings of communications, minutes and resolutions. 6. Refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen the question on the advisability of that decision. Boy, oh boy. 7. Advocate caution. Be reasonable and urge your fellow conferees to be reasonable. And avoid haste, which might result in embarrassments or difficulties later on. 8. Be worried about the propriety of any decision. Oh my God, do we have the power to do that? Maybe we should check that out. Maybe we should go ask someone. Raise the question of whether such action as is contemplated lies within the jurisdiction of the group, or whether it might conflict with the policy of some higher echelon. Managers and supervisors. Demand written orders. 2. Misunderstand orders. Ask endless questions or engage in long correspondence about such orders. Quibble over them when you can. 3. Do everything possible to delay the delivery of orders. Even though parts of an order may be ready beforehand, don't deliver it until it is completely ready. 4. Don't order new working materials until your current stock have been virtually exhausted, so that the slightest delay in filling your order will mean a shutdown. 5. Order high quality materials which are hard to get. If you don't get them, argue about it. Want inferior materials will mean inferior work. 6. In making work assignments, always sign out the unimportant jobs first. See that the important jobs are assigned to inefficient workers of poor machines. 7. Insist on perfect work in relatively unimportant products. Send back for refinishing those which have the least little flaws. Their hair out of place, it's this, it's that, take it back, don't do it, I don't want it. Make mistakes in routing so that parts of materials will be sent to the wrong place in the plant. When training new workers, give incomplete or misleading instructions. Now, where have you seen or heard this before? 10. To lower morale, and with it production, be pleasant to inefficient workers. Give them undeserved promotions. Discriminate against efficient workers. Complain unjustly about their work. And this, I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon, because you'll get a general idea of what they're advocating here. This is for office workers. Multiply paperwork in plausible ways. Start duplicate files. Multiply the procedures and clearances involved in issuing instructions, paychecks, and so on. See that 3 people have to approve everything where 1 would do. Office workers. Make mistakes in quantities of materials when you are copying orders. Confuse similar names, use wrong addresses. 2. Prolong correspondence with government bureaus. Misfile essential documents. In making carbon copies, make one too few so that an extra copying job will have to be done. Tell important callers the boss is busy or talking on another telephone. And so on and so forth. And this just describes, well, let me first say, this is incredibly effective at slowing you down when you may have a completely valid complaint or point to make or observation. You are immediately sidelined, sent to a committee. For example, if you go to the council with a delegation, your first delegation is allowed 5 minutes to present. Now, I don't know about you, but things have nuances. It is not always that easy to present in just 5 minutes. The second time you delegate, you're only allowed 2 delegations when you go to council, and the second delegation you're given half that time, 2.5 minutes, which is of course equally inadequate for presenting your case. Now, the councillors get unlimited times to rebut, to ask you questions, and so on and so forth, but you are extremely limited in what you can put forward. And this really puts you at a very big disadvantage. And as I've mentioned before, this is an endless point, and I will continue to make it as long as I can, and that is, council meetings in the afternoon is totally undemocratic. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure you've all experienced this kind of stuff, well, now you know where it comes from. These were not accidents. When you go into government departments, and you see, this is a thing, if you're going to toe the line, if you're going to play by all the rules, or if you fit within these narrow boundaries that have been laid out for the citizens by the government, I guess you're good to go. But if you have an exception to the rule, or if you feel that you've been mistreated in some way, or you have a query, all of a sudden, you just can't, you can't get yourself heard. So this is a real impediment to progress, and I think this shows the inflexibility of government, which I personally think is having an awful lot of difficulty dealing with the 21st century. I think that because government basically is run on secrecy and a need-to-know basis, and that's exactly what this document is. It states right at the beginning, you only give people the sections of the document that they need to see. You don't ever, ever, ever give them the whole document. Well, now it's in the hands of the public because it's been downloaded, it's unclassified, and it's out there, and luckily enough I came across it. But it shows you that it's no accident when you go in there, when you have a child, for example, that doesn't fit the school model. Tell me a parent who hasn't experienced the trauma of trying to deal with a system that doesn't want to be flexible about certain things, when really that flexibility would be no great stretch. I'm sure there's lots of people have been through that. I've been through that with my children. They happen to be the kind of children who wouldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes, which actually describes my childhood. And it was extremely difficult dealing with the school board and the principal, and they were very, very uncooperative, and they really used all of these things to slow you down, tire you out, weigh you down, make you feel like you don't want to tackle the project of even going up against this kind of immovable force. And that's why you see the mess out there today that you see. I was talking about this with a customer this afternoon, and we both agreed, that everyone can see that whatever's going on is not working anymore, or it's not working well. And the government seems to be completely intransigent on changing its attitude, on opening its doors, letting a little light in, and start responding to the public. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Okay, well, I'm going to let you go. That's my rant for the day, and I will be bringing you other such items should I come across them. Anyway, I would like to thank you for listening to my rant, and comment down below as you so desire. Thank you very much. This is the Hound Dog signing off.